The cooking time will be about 10 or 15 minutes. It'll depend on how powerful your microwave is. And on a side note, I cook everything in this video in the microwave. If you'd like to cook things in the microwave as well, you should get some microwave-safe glass containers, preferably with a lid so that things don't dry out and things cook faster. Never microwave plastic wrap or any kind of plastic container, even if it says it's microwave safe. I know some people don't like the microwave, but I'm using it here because it's the fastest, easiest way to cook. It uses the least amount of energy, and food cooked in the microwave retains more nutrients than other cooking methods. If you're not a fan of microwaves, your next best cooking method is to get a big steaming pot, which you can find at Asian grocery stores or order from Amazon or somewhere. These are especially useful for cooking for 4 or 5 people. So having said that, getting back to the taco meat, you'll know this is done when the lentils and the onions get soft, and you'll know it's overcooked if the onions have lost their flavor. And we have some diced tomatoes on top, obviously, I added after it was done. And we'll split open our avocado and scoop that in. So now this mix is ready for whatever small whole grain tortilla you're using, and we'll just stuff as much mixed greens in there as we can. So we'll call these fajitas just because we have some onions and some peppers there. I microwaved this plate as is in the microwave after chopping them and added some chili powder. The thing to take away from these taco burrito recipes is that as long as you have some tortilla, a lettuce, a tomato or avocado, you can add any kind of star vegetable, whatever's in your refrigerator that you want to get rid of. Especially if it is along with some onion, it's really going to work well. If it's mushrooms or carrots or peppers or almost anything. It's also a really good way to eat a lot of lettuce. So this is stuffed acorn squash. The stuffing is the same mushroom, onion, lentil mix from our previous taco recipe. And the way you make that again is to microwave some lentils with some water on their own for about 10 minutes and then add your mushrooms, onions, cumin, salt, and pepper and microwave for another 10 or 15 minutes. I also added some turmeric in this case. Turmeric always works well with squash. I put a second story on top of this dish with a plate to make some room to cook my squash on. Before you microwave it, you have to poke some holes through it for air so it doesn't explode. When it's done, it'll be soft and about as squishy as a really ripe banana. And when it's cool enough to handle, you'll just slice it in half and scoop the seeds and gooey stuff out of the middle. And then we just stuff it with our stuffing. I added a little basil to the stuffing. You could also do cilantro or parsley. With the greens, I just would do a little bit of lime or lemon and some salt and pepper. I'd say 3 or maybe 4 of these half squashes serves one person, so you would adjust accordingly if you weren't serving this with any other side dishes. Here's a salad of avocado, lettuce, and kimchi. Kimchi is a Korean sauerkraut. When you buy it, make sure it doesn't have fish guts in it, which they traditionally make it with. And you could also use sauerkraut instead, but when you buy sauerkraut, don't buy it from the room temperature shelf part of the store. Buy it from the refrigerated section. The problem with the good kimchi and the good sauerkraut is that it's really expensive, so you can search the web for an online instruction on how to make sauerkraut or kimchi. It's really easy, and for the same price, you can make 10 times the amount. You could substitute any other kind of greens with this. The avocado kimchi combo works well with a lot of things. Most people swing a big sharp knife around their hands when they're cutting open an avocado, but you can just tear avocado in half with your bare hands. And then we'll add about a third or a quarter of this jar of kimchi in here for this pound of salad. So you probably know you should eat a lot of leafy green vegetables every day. The problem is that a big salad, even if it's a pound or 2 pounds, is only a few hundred calories. So if you eat a big salad, you should eat a second course and not consider it a meal, or else you'll be essentially skipping a meal. There's a salad dressing section coming up later in the video. There's also a section later on sunflower sprouts, which is a really great source of fresh, cheap greens. So we're going to make some brown rice to start. To make some rice, you do 1 part rice, 2.5 parts water. I generally just eyeball it. So we'll put this in the microwave for about 27 minutes. If it's more rice, you might have to microwave it a bit longer. You don't have to microwave your rice every time. Of course, you could microwave a large batch of rice for the week and keep portions in the refrigerator or freezer. And this is our bok choy. You could also use baby bok choy. It would probably take less time to cook if you did, but we're gonna cut the bottom off of this and just chop it up and wash it because you can see it's pretty dirty. 27 minutes is up and the rice is 2/3 done. I don't want to cook it completely. I just wanted to give it a head start. You want to drain all the water out of the partially cooked rice because we're adding some vegetables, and as the vegetables cook, they'll release some water that'll get soaked into the rice. And since you dumped out the rice water, you'll avoid this being something that looks like soup by the time it's done. And I chopped up another bok choy off camera just to make sure I had plenty to eat, and I'll probably have leftovers. So I'm going to microwave this for about 20 minutes and I'll stop and stir it in 6 or 7 minute intervals. So this is cooked right when it starts to get a little translucent, kind of soft. It's ready to eat. So here's our final product. That's kimchi on the left and an avocado on the right. You probably want to eat it with a knife and fork and chop up the kimchi and avocado along with the other stuff. You can have it with some salt or soy sauce, of course. You might notice that there's not a lot of rice on the plate. I left most of that rice I cooked in the dish, and I'll eat probably just half of that. I'll eat more bok choy, but not more rice, because rice is high in calories and low in nutrients, and I want to eat lots of bok choy, which is low in calories but high in nutrients. So these are our beets. We'll chop off the greens. The greens are edible. You can save those for later. And then we use our peeler on the beet, get the beet peeled. You can't really microwave these whole because they'll dry out, so you need to chop them up. So just be careful when you're chopping these because they're really hard. You could put these in a food processor if you have one. I'm going to chop these into 1-inch cubes and put them in some water. So here's our chopped beets. There's about 1 inch of water in the bottom of the dish, and we'll microwave these for 7-minute intervals, stirring and checking to see if they're getting close to being done. So after about 20 minutes, they should be done. They'll be soft and they'll be kind of like the texture of some cubed ham. So these are ready to eat once they cool off. They're a really good snack or side dish. And from this point, you can make it more interesting with some sour apples and walnuts. These are some turnips. These are really good in soups. We're going to cut them up after we cook them, and they'll just be something to eat as a snack or a side dish. So carefully stab some holes into your turnips so that they don't explode in your microwave. I'm going to microwave these for about 9 minutes. Your time will vary depending on your microwave's power. It's a little tricky to tell if they're done or not. You don't want to cook them so much that they turn into mush. You want them to still be kind of firm. If you cook them too long, they completely lose their flavor. The skin is pretty bitter, so you probably want to cut it off or peel it off if it is peelable from the bottom. So this is ready to eat like this. You could add a little salt and pepper and maybe some turmeric. This recipe is just sweet potato or squash with some unsweetened applesauce and some cinnamon and walnuts. And on the topic of walnuts and all nuts and seeds, your digestive system would much rather prefer all your food be soft and full of water. And your teeth aren't going to be able to break down nuts and seeds as well as a food processor would. So I'd recommend grinding and blending all your nuts and seeds into a fine powder or nut butter. It's okay to use roasted or raw seeds or nuts. You can soak your nuts or seeds as well. To do that, you will just take some raw nuts or seeds, rinse them, soak them for about 8 hours, and then rinse them again. It's going to make the nuts or seeds come to life and be much softer and full of water. They won't last more than a few days in the refrigerator before they get moldy, so you can dehydrate them if you have a food dehydrator, or put them in a 150-degree oven for 10 hours to dehydrate, and then they will last for a while. But anyways, getting back to this recipe, for a sweet potato, real simple, microwave it for about 5 minutes, see if it's done. If it's soft enough, microwave it some more if needed. You can change the different sweet potatoes or yams, white sweet potatoes, orange sweet potatoes that you might use for this dish. This is one of those dishes that you can switch a lot of things in. For the sweet potato flavor, there are a lot of things like taro root if you have access to an Asian grocery store, or lots of different types of squash that you can keep switching around every time you make this and get a lot of healthy genetic diversity into your diet, which also keeps it interesting because you're getting new flavors and your taste buds aren't getting dull. Anyways, to get specific, if you wanted to use an acorn squash, you would just poke some holes through the air cavity in the middle so that it doesn't explode, and microwave that till it gets pretty soft, and then you will scoop the seeds and slimy stuff out, and then you're ready to add that to your applesauce. Yet another option is a butternut squash. I'm cutting this butternut squash in half here because there is a air pocket near the bottom, and that top part is completely dense. So that means these are going to cook at different times. So I want to be able to take this bottom half out of the microwave before the other part is done, because I'm going to cook that part longer. As you can see, there's an air cavity in there. And so this is our squash when it's done being cooked. It's not very pretty, but it's very tasty. I let that top half cook longer than this bottom half I'm lifting up, so this is ready to eat. So to start, we'll break up our whole grain spaghetti in our dish and put a little water in there. And to put a plate on top of that to have a surface for my spaghetti squash. I poked some holes through the squash, and almost everything you microwave you need to poke some holes in, especially if it has a cavity of air in the middle of it like squash does. Otherwise it'll explode. So you'll cook this in about 5-minute, 6-minute intervals. The spaghetti will be done before the spaghetti squash, so you can strain that out and just keep an eye on the squash. You'll know the squash is done when you can kind of put your thumb in it and leave a indentation. It'll kind of be soft like a ripe avocado, if you know what that's like. So when your spaghetti squash is done and cool enough to handle, you will cut it in half and scoop out the seeds and the slimy stuff. After that, you just take a fork and scrape it out. So now those things are added in with the tomato sauce. The tomato sauce was something I had left over. That's made by putting a diced onion in with a 32-ounce can of some crushed tomatoes with some herbs and spices. And you cook the sauce in the microwave or on the stove top, stirring in between till it's done. So that is it for this dish. At this point, you could also add some fresh herbs or some fresh minced garlic. You could also stir in some sunflower seed butter or cashew butter at this point. So we'll rewind here before the tomato sauce and we'll go in a different direction. This will be a tabouli sort of. It won't exactly be tabouli because ours has parsley, lemon, tomato, and onion and some wheat, but it typically also has mint and olive oil, but since I don't eat olive oil, we'll skip that. And we're adding a big spaghetti squash, which also makes it not quite tabbouleh. So we'll just add all these ingredients together with our spaghetti squash. You can also add some nuts or seeds, blend it into a powder or a nut seed butter. Though I'm using whole walnuts here, you're generally better off having things blended to make them more soft. But anyways, this is going to contrast nicely against the lemon juice. Also add some salt and pepper to taste. Also, what would work well with this is some minced fresh garlic. You can also add much more parsley than what is pictured. That's maybe one bunch. You can add 3 or 4 bunches or more. You can also do mint, cilantro, or basil instead or in addition to. We're going to be making collard greens in this section. You could substitute any other dark leafy green that can be cooked like collards. We're just going to put these in our dish and put a little water in there with a lid on and cook these before anything else because they're pretty tough and have a long cooking time. So while the greens are cooking, I'm going to chop up about a cup of carrots and a cup of onions. I'm also going to chop up some jalapeno peppers. The peppers are optional. So the greens have been cooking in the microwave for about 6 minutes. So now we will add our carrots, onions, and peppers. At this point, we'll also add some seasonings, salt, pepper, and a pinch of cumin. You can also add red pepper and cayenne pepper to make it as spicy as you'd like. So we'll cook this the same way we cook most everything else, in 6-minute intervals, stirring in between. Keep in mind that if you have something with a lid on it, with water inside of it, it's going to steam as well, so it's going to cook much faster. And you'll know it's done when everything is soft enough to put a fork through and looks like it could be chewed easily. And you'll know that you've gone too far and overcooked it if the carrots and onions have lost their flavor. If I have nutritional yeast, I add it at this point, maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons. And I'll add about a third or half a cup of rice just to make the dish feel more like a meal. So it's ready to eat at this point. It's really good with hot sauce if you like hot sauce. There's also a garlic sauce made later in this video that would work really well with this recipe. You can find the garlic sauce below in the table of contents and click on that in the description to jump to that section. Eggplant caponata is very simple. It's just some tomatoes, eggplant, onion, some raisins, and some Italian seasoning. You can also add capers if you have them, though they are not mandatory. So we'll slice our eggplant and the rest of our vegetables. And then we'll add about this many raisins, maybe half a cup, 2/3 a cup. You might think this looks like it would taste odd to add raisins to tomatoes and onions, but it's a very old recipe and they all taste really pleasant together. We'll add about a tablespoon of this Italian seasoning, which is just some oregano, basil, marjoram, onion powder, garlic powder, all mixed up together. And then we will stir this and maybe add a little salt and pepper. And this is what it looks like when it's done. I microwaved it in 6-7 minute intervals, stirring in between. And you know it's done when the eggplant gets a little brownish. That's when it is easy to chew. At this point, you could add some finely minced fresh garlic. To me, minced garlic is just like salt and pepper. It's just one of those things that you almost always add to food. Depending on whether you're having this as a side dish or as a whole meal in itself, you could add a half cup of brown rice or some grains. So sushi, usually the vegetables are avocado, cucumber, and carrots. You can add different kinds and different kinds of herbs and experiment, but to start out, you can just go with what's usually used. Sushi rice usually has vinegar, but we're going to use lemon instead to do the same thing, make it a little sour. Sushi also has sesame seeds sometimes, and you can add sesame seeds, or in this case, we're adding some tahini, which is sesame seed butter. I'll also add about a teaspoon or two of minced ginger to the rice. If you have sushi in restaurants, you know it comes with this purplish pinkish type of pickled ginger, but fresh ginger works with sushi just as well. So I hope any of that stuff doesn't make this dish overly complicated because it is really simple. It's just seaweed, rice, and some vegetables, and usually avocado. Hopefully you ordered 1,000 sheets of seaweed along with all your other dry goods from Amazon. And making these into rolls is just as easy as it looks. You put down the rice and then your avocado and cucumber or whatever vegetable you're using, whatever herb or lettuce you'd like to add. The seaweed seals up when you roll it because you put some water between the seaweed and the plate, and the moisture makes the seaweed stick to itself when you roll it up. And then you just use a sharp knife and slice the tube into smaller pieces, and it's ready to eat. So that's the way to make sushi for a dinner party. If you're cooking for yourself or some people that are not too particular, you can make sushi the ugly way, and that is just to throw everything into the bowl with your rice along with your seaweed, and all your ingredients are the same, so it basically tastes the same, but nowhere near as elegant. So this is a soup with some typical soup ingredients: onions, potatoes, carrots, celery, some brown rice. I've let the rice cook for about 10 minutes to give it a head start because it takes a little longer to cook than the vegetables. You want to put your celery in a strainer at this point. Celery is usually pretty dirty, so we'll give that a rinse. So we'll add a few spices like this dried herb mixture. It has some oregano and parsley and stuff, some turmeric, some cumin, and some pepper. And I'll fill this up with some more water almost to the top. And I'm going to add some lentils at this point, and I'll make sure to push the lentils down into the water so that they are submerged and cooking. So I'll cook this in 7 minute increments and stir in between. This will take about half an hour in my microwave, could take more or less in yours. Here's when it's done, when the vegetables are soft enough to chew but not overcooked to the point that they lose their flavor. I also added some parsley, as you could see. This is our fennel soup. It's some potatoes, carrots, onions. I threw a green pepper in there and fennel. There's a bulb of fennel cut up at the bottom. If you're not familiar with what fennel looks like, this is fennel. It is kind of like celery in texture. It has a flavor like licorice, but more fresh. If you don't like licorice, you'll still like this. On a side note, if you want to make a soup out of anything, pretty much all you need to start with are onions and carrots and maybe celery. Once you start with those three ingredients, you can make pretty much any vegetable that you haven't tried before or had in a while, or a vegetable that might go bad in your refrigerator and you need to use. They'll all work pretty well in some soup. Soup is also good for adding a lot of spices into. You can't really mess up putting spices into soup. It always turns out tasting really good. You can also add all sorts of fresh herbs in the beginning of making your soup or towards the end. Like in this case, actually, I'm adding some chopped ginger and some Italian parsley towards the end of the soup. I don't want to add it in right now because I don't want the flavor to cook out of them completely. So now we're going to add some water to this and put it in the microwave. What you could also do is add any kind of rice or grains like barley. Also, any bean or legume you want to put in here would work well too. But you just want to be aware of the cooking times and making sure that you're not putting in something that's going to be too hard to chew on by the time the soup is done. So we're microwaving in 7-minute intervals and stirring in between to make sure everything is getting cooked evenly. So this is our finished soup. I don't know if I mentioned I put some cumin, salt and pepper, and a little bit of coriander and turmeric in here for spices. You should just add a few pinches or more if you know what you're doing. And I added some lentils in there. I'm not sure if you can see it. I also maybe should have added some brown rice. This is a little bit too rough to not eat with some grains, so this is just kind of soup I would have with some bread or add some rice at the end if I had rice cooked already. But anyway, so this is a soup. It has a sweet potato or two, about a half of a red cabbage, some tomato. There's some carrots down there, and there's also a green pepper. And this is mostly just some random things I had in my refrigerator and didn't know what else to do with. So my options were to put it into a burrito or put it into some sushi, or in this case, put it all into some soup and add some spices. Wherever you would use a sweet potato, you could also use a white sweet potato or an acorn or butternut squash. They all have the same type of flavor and texture. If you're not familiar with what spices and seasonings to use, just buy the most commonly used spices, which are thyme, oregano, curry powder, turmeric, cumin, red pepper, coriander, and just add a little bit at a time. And as you cook, add more and more and experiment with what goes with what. The ones that I just mentioned work with almost everything in most situations. I'm adding a few teaspoons of cinnamon also. Cinnamon works really well with sweet potatoes. It would also work well if we were using squash instead. I also added 2 teaspoons of ginger to this bowl of stuff. Ginger works really well with sweet potatoes. Ginger always works really well with spices. So after adding those spices and some salt, I filled this up with water, not quite to the surface of the vegetables, maybe an inch or so away because the vegetables released some water themselves. So this brightly colored, kind of sweet, gingery, spicy soup is what I had after a half an hour. I cooked it in 7-minute intervals, stirring in between. You could add some rice at this point to it, or have this with some whole grain bread. So this starts out with cooking some onions and potatoes in some water with some salt and pepper. So we will chop up our potatoes and our onions first. You can add fresh or dried rosemary to this. If you don't, it'll still be flavorful. And we'll cook this in 7 or 8 minute increments until the potatoes start to get kind of soft. And then for the asparagus, you should only buy asparagus that's really firm at the tips. If it's smushy and slimy, then it's not fresh. With asparagus, as you probably know, you need to break an inch or two off of the bottom of the stalk, and then you can peel the rest of the remainder of the bottom of the stalk because the pieces tend to get stuck in your teeth. If not, but it's not essential that you peel your asparagus, especially when they're all as small as these asparagus are. So we've cooked this potato onion mixture for about 12 minutes, and they're getting kind of soft. They're not completely done yet, so we want to stop it and add our asparagus now. So then we'll cook this for about 3 minutes and stir it, and then cook it for another 3 minutes maybe. And it'll cook fast because it's in water and the asparagus is pretty thin. So you can cook it al dente or you can cook it more well done, but just make sure to stop cooking it before it turns brown. And you might want to eat this with a spoon just to make sure you're getting all the liquid in the bottom there. You could also add some nutritional yeast to make a kind of asparagus onion gravy out of the mixture. It might look like I've gotten to a part of the video where I'm just making stuff up and throwing things into a pot, but these three ingredients really work well together, and you can keep it interesting by using white asparagus instead of green and purple potatoes instead of white and other onions, etc. Here's a head of cauliflower I chopped up. In this case, I'm adding it to a bowl of rice that I cooked for about 25 minutes, and the rice will continue to cook as the cauliflower cooks. Here it is done. Cooked it for about, I think, 10 or 12 minutes. You probably know what cooked cauliflower looks like, so at this point you can just put some soy sauce on it and eat it as is. This works well with peas, so right when this is cooked, you can dump some frozen peas on it. There's no need to cook the peas. The peas will cool down the cauliflower will warm up the peas. For sauce with this, I'd recommend the garlic sauce, which you can skip to if you look in the table of contents in the description. I would add some mustard to the garlic sauce and then add some Italian seasoning, which is some dried basil, oregano, and parsley. This recipe is just some green beans with some peas and rice. When you get green beans, you need to break the stem off that side, and then just break them into some bite-sized pieces. And then I'll microwave these in 5 or 6 minute intervals. It shouldn't take more than maybe 10 minutes to cook this much beans. Here they are when they're done. They don't look much different, but they're much softer. You know that they are overcooked if they change color and turn brown, then they just taste terrible. You've probably had beans like that if you've ever eaten beans in a cafeteria in a school. And now we're going to add some frozen peas. Peas don't need to be cooked. You can just dump about a cup or so onto your beans, and that thaws the peas and cools down the beans. So then after adding the rice, this is something that is ready to eat with a little bit of soy sauce. The serving size for all of these meals is 1.5 to 2 pounds or 700 to 900 grams. So if you require 2,000 calories a day, you'll be eating about 6 pounds of food every day. And that's because produce is 90% water, and also this food is low in calories but high in nutrients, which makes it the opposite of the average diet, which is high in calories but low in nutrients. Here's some broccoli crowns. When you're buying broccoli, always make sure that it's really stiff. If it's not stiff, it's not fresh. It'll be rubbery and floppy. So we'll just chop these up and put them in a bowl. And I'll cook it in 6-minute intervals. This much broccoli probably take 15, 16 minutes to cook. And if you want to cook this with a lid on it, it'll probably cook in half that time. So this is cooked broccoli, soft enough to chew. Gets a more deep green, vibrant color, and it looks a little bit translucent. This is sort of like in the previous recipe with green beans. Broccoli is another vegetable that's often cooked to death and turned completely brown. If you overcooked broccoli, it tastes really horrible. So just make sure you take it off the heat before that happens. I like to eat broccoli on its own, just with some rice and some sauce. The only other vegetable, although technically it's a fruit, that I would add with this would be some tomatoes. You can cook tomatoes alongside the broccoli and add a lot of pepper, and that tastes really good. So we're going to be making these Brussels sprouts on top of some rice we've been cooking for about 25 minutes. These Brussels sprouts came in a bag, which is good because they have an expiration date. You want to make sure when you're buying them there's no dirt around them. Sometimes dirt gets deep inside the Brussels sprouts, and I have no idea how you're supposed to eat those. I guess some people peel them if they want to get the dirt out, but Brussels sprouts are some of the most hated vegetables. It's because they are covered in dirt, or they are old and you can't tell that they're old, or they're just overcooked. But since these are clean and we know when these are bagged and we're not going to overcook them, these are going to turn out really well. So we'll just cook this in 6-minute increments and stir along the way. This will take maybe about 15 minutes or so to cook. So these are done just like anything else, soft enough to eat, not cooked long enough that they've turned brown and lost all their color and lost their flavor, and not become a horrible tasting flavor, which Brussels sprouts do if you cook them too long. Here's just some zucchini cooking with some rice. You can also use some yellow squash, and this is pretty simple, not much instruction needed here. You just want to cook it until it gets pretty soft. So this is when it's done. The zucchini is pretty much falling apart by the time I stop cooking it. And then I'll just eat this with some soy sauce or salt and pepper and maybe some seaweed. Here's a whole head of cabbage. The spice is some curry powder on top and some salt and pepper. Underneath are some carrots and onions. So after cooking for a while and stirring in between, the cabbage gets kind of a glazed look and it's really soft. Cabbage is another vegetable like Brussels sprouts that gets a bad rap, but as long as you cook it enough and do not overcook it, it's pretty tasty. And you may have noticed a pattern with the last dozen recipes. Cook some rice 2/3 of the way, drain the water out, add some vegetables and spices, maybe add some herbs and more spices at the end, put the lid on it, cook it 5 minutes, stir it, cook it another 5 minutes, and then add some salt or soy sauce or sauce from the sauce and salad dressing section later in this video. And don't forget about the Chinese restaurant vegetables like water chestnuts, baby corn, or bamboo shoots. This is pad thai. Those are some brown rice noodles and some daikon radish and mung bean sprouts. This is another one of those things that you could add any number of vegetables and herbs to. You could add zucchini, you could add all different types of mushrooms. All you really need is your brown rice noodles and your pad thai sauce. And the pad thai sauce is peanuts or peanut butter, garlic, ginger, and tamarind. Supermarkets don't usually sell tamarind. You might have to go to the Hispanic or Asian grocery stores to find it. If you buy it like this, you want to peel off that outer shell and pull out the seeds. You can also buy it in a paste or buy it in a seedless block, which I have done here. This is traditionally made with red chilies, so you can add some red chilies depending on how hot you'd like it to be. I'm going to be using a daikon radish. These don't taste like the small red round radishes. They have more of a mild taste. You might not be able to find these where you live, so you could just use zucchini instead. You can make the zucchini or radish look like noodles if you'd like, if you have a spiralizer, or you can slice it like I'm doing here with a cheese grater. And I'm going to put 3 times as much radish as I am putting noodles in this meal because noodles are high in calories and low in nutrients, and I want most of the noodles to be this radish, which is high in nutrients and low in calories. So the sauce ingredients are blended in the food processor, and you'll notice the sauce is more of a powder than a sauce, but the radish is going to cook alongside it, and that's going to release water and make it more saucy. I'm going to save some of the garlic and ginger and add a little bit of that raw at the end, and that's just going to add more dynamic flavor. I'm going to add the mung bean sprouts at this point as well. I actually show how to grow these in this video. If you'd like to see in the table of contents below, you can jump to that part. I know a lot of people eat mung bean sprouts raw, but they tend to sometimes carry salmonella, listeria, or E. coli, so I always wash my hands and wash any surface they were on and cook them thoroughly. Anyways, I'm gonna put these in the microwave and just cook these until the radish is done. You can get your brown rice noodles going as well. You could just as easily use some whole wheat fettuccine. It's probably cheaper. And if your noodles are done before your other ingredients, you can just keep them in some cold water so they don't stick together. This is cooked for about 12 minutes and the radish is done. So now I'm going to add some cilantro. And as I said, I like to add about a teaspoon or two of some raw ginger and raw garlic when it's done. There's one last ingredient, and that's going to be a sweetener of your choice. If you use molasses or some maple syrup, you can also use some pitted medjool dates or raisins blended up into a paste in your food processor. The sweetener is necessary because the tamarind is very sour. This carrot ginger dressing is the exact same salad dressing used in Japanese restaurants. If you've ever had a salad there with orange salad dressing, this is it. And the ingredients we'll be using are some sesame seeds. You can use any kind of seeds or nuts, soaked, roasted, or raw. Using any kind of vinegar and some lemon juice, salt, or soy sauce. We'll be using some black pepper and about this much ginger, which is maybe a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half, half an onion, and a carrot. We'll start with grinding up our sesame seeds and some black pepper. It'll be about half a teaspoon of black pepper, and all of the ingredients, the specific recipe will be in the description for these sauces because these recipes need to be a little more precise than other recipes in this video. The recipe for this sauce is almost exactly the same as the next recipe for curry sauce. And the only difference is a teaspoon of curry powder and a teaspoon of peppers. And then you will cook it. Otherwise, they're the same. So after a lot of stopping and stirring and blending again, we get a sesame seed butter. Then it's time to add the rest of our ingredients, onion and ginger and carrots. Blend those together. And I add about a teaspoon or so of lemon juice. I just eyeball it. Add some now and add some later. Teaspoon of soy sauce. And about a half teaspoon of vinegar. A little bit goes a long way. And make sure to stop and stir and start again just to make sure you're getting all the pepper and sesame seeds mixed in. So when your mixture is thoroughly blended, it's going to be a little too thick to use as a sauce or salad dressing. So we're going to take a seedless orange and start adding orange wedges to it till it gets to the consistency you want. Or you could just add water if you don't have an orange available. But what the orange is going to do is the sourness and acidity is just going to work well against the sesame seeds along with the lemon juice and vinegar. And also the sweetness of the orange is going to counteract the onion. And then your last ingredient, whether you add the orange or not, is going to be some kind of sweetener. As far as the bottled liquid sweeteners go, molasses is the best thing to use. You can also just drop some dates into the food processor, and it's going to be up to you how much you add. Just keep adding little by little until it tastes right. And then this dressing is ready to serve. It doesn't need to be cooked or anything. It's typically served with romaine lettuce. It works with any raw type of greens. It also works really well as a sauce on any cooked vegetable. It's very gingery, so anything that ginger would work with, then this would work with. This is curry sauce. This would not work as a salad dressing. This is cooked. This goes on pretty much any cooked vegetables with rice or any grains. The recipe for this is almost identical to the previous recipe, the carrot ginger dressing. It's going to contain any roasted, raw, or soaked nuts or seeds, and some apple cider vinegar, some salt or soy sauce, some lemon juice, and some black pepper. This is going to contain about a tablespoon or two of ginger. You can add a lot more ginger. You can also add garlic because this is going to be cooked. Then we'll have about half an onion and then equal volume of the onion in carrots. We'll also be adding a pinch or two of some crushed red pepper, chili powder, cayenne pepper, and about a teaspoon of curry powder. So to start, add whatever nuts or seeds you're using and some black peppercorns if you're using whole peppercorns. You can use sesame seeds or sunflower seeds. They're both fairly cheap. And you can also experiment with any other kind of nuts, macadamia nuts, pine nuts, whatever your budget allows. Be sure to do a lot of stopping and stirring to make sure you're getting all the chunks ground up smoothly. So the sesame seeds and pepper have been sufficiently shredded. You can add the vegetables, your ginger, onion, and carrots. You can also add some garlic if you like. And about a teaspoon or so of lemon juice. I just eyeball everything. Then a teaspoon of some soy sauce and maybe half a teaspoon of some vinegar. It's also at this point you should add your teaspoon of curry powder along with your pinch or two of some spicy pepper seeds or chili powder. It'll be up to you depending on how spicy you'd like your curry to be. Once you go more than about a teaspoon of any hot peppers or hot ingredients, the sauce is going to start to get really spicy. So that's your threshold. So as that's blending, you want to stop and stir it. Make sure you're getting all the chunks evenly blended. And when it's done, it's going to be a little thick to be a sauce. So you want to add some water. What you can do ideally would be to add slices from a seedless orange, just the same as in the previous sauce. The orange is going to make it more acidic and sweeter, and it'll do the job of watering it down. So at this point, you want to put it in your microwave safe glass container, microwave it for 4 minutes, or simmer it on the stove for a while. Though it's not necessary to cook this on its own, you could dump this into any raw vegetables you're cooking along with some rice. So after about 4 or 5 minutes, it should be cooked enough so that the onion is a little softer and sweeter and everything tastes a little more mild, and it'll be pretty bitter at this point just because turmeric is the main ingredient in curry powder and it's kind of bitter. So you want to add some molasses maybe, or whatever your favorite bottled sweetener is, or some dates. You can blend some dates into a paste in your food processor and just add those here. I can't tell you how much sweetener to add exactly, just keep adding little by little until it tastes right. And then our curry sauce is done. If you've had curry sauce before, you know it goes with just about anything. I'm adding it to some bok choy here. This garlic sauce is also a salad dressing. It also works well as an imitation cheese if you wanted to cook with it. It contains half a teaspoon black pepper, 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, maybe 2 tablespoons of sunflower seed butter, 3 cloves of garlic, and some soy sauce and lemon juice. You could also add half a teaspoon of some apple cider vinegar. So you'll add 1, 2, or maybe 3 teaspoons of lemon juice. If you use fresh lemon juice, it's going to be much stronger, so add less. But anyway, I like to add some at first and then taste it and add some later. I'm going to have the specific ingredients for this recipe in the description along with all the other sauces, because it usually doesn't matter if you follow the ingredients in the recipe specifically or not, but I think with sauces it does matter because a lot can go wrong. You don't want to have more than 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. When you're using raw garlic, you have to be careful not to overdo it. And there's our 2 heaping tablespoons of nutritional yeast. Next, we'll add 2 tablespoons of, in this case, we're using sunflower butter. You can use any nuts or seeds, raw, roasted, or soaked for this. The way the sauce is, garlic is kind of the star of the sauce, but you could add lots of other things for flavor, like lots of other herbs or spices. You could add ginger, you could add a teaspoon of mustard or a teaspoon of miso paste. The stuff's going to be pretty thick unless you add some water or some vegetable stock. And then it's done. No need to cook this. It works really well with cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. A lot of the heavy leafy greens are cruciferous vegetables, like kale, for example. You can dump on this kale and eat. It works as a salad dressing with a lot of other lettuces. I don't know what it would not work on. And also, as I said, you can cook this as a cheese. If you're going to cook it, you can add a lot more garlic. This avocado cheese can be eaten raw. It's just like a flavored cream cheese. You can also cook with it. We're going to be using it later in the calzone and pizza sections. This recipe is almost exactly the same as the previous garlic sauce recipe. The only difference is going to be you're going to add 2 avocados. The other difference is you could add a lot more garlic because the avocado tends to mute all other flavors. And you might be concerned this tastes like guacamole, but it really doesn't. It just kind of tastes like a ricotta Parmesan cheese mixture. The flavor of the avocado doesn't matter at all to this recipe. It's just being used for its fat and fluffy properties. So be sure to buy the cheap avocados or avocado prepackaged mixed from Walmart, Sam's Club, or Costco, and then freeze it and then thaw it when you're ready to use in this recipe. So after you add 2 avocados, what you add next will be basically the same as the last recipe. 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, a tablespoon or 2 of some raw or roasted or soaked nut or seed butter, and then some lemon juice, maybe 2 or 3 teaspoons, and some salt. As the Mixture is mixing and it's near its end. I'll keep tasting to see how much salt and how much lemon juice needs to be added. Making dough is a little more complicated and time consuming than the rest of the recipes in this video, but there are a lot of advantages to making it. For one, that buying whole wheat, whole grain dough is very expensive and making it yourself is super cheap. You can make pita bread, which works really well in lots of recipes in this video already, like as a tortilla in the taco and fajita recipes. You can add any of the sauces from the sauce section into these. You could also put the raw avocado cheese in here with any kind of cooked vegetables and lettuce. I like to use pita bread to eat salad. Instead of eating a big salad with a fork, you can just take your salad and cram it in there, make it really compact and easier to eat. And then this dough is going to enable us in the next few recipes to make some new interesting flavors, new textures, and use lots of vegetables, herbs, and spices in new ways. To start, put a packet of yeast into a large bowl and then get 1 3/4 cups of hot water, somewhere between 105 degrees and 125 degrees. If you get the tap water running just about as hot as you can stand it, then you're somewhere in between this range of 105 and 125. The specific ingredients for this dough are in the description with all of the other recipes that need to be a little more precise. So now our packet of yeast has 1 3/4 cups of warm water added to it. It's at this point you want to add a teaspoon of something very sugary, like a teaspoon of agave or maple syrup or molasses. You can also add your teaspoon of salt at this point. Then you want to leave this alone for 5 or 10 minutes. When you come back, it should look like this with a nice layer of foam. That means the yeast is alive and well. If there is no foam, it might mean that the yeast is dead or your water was too hot or too cold. Next, you'll add 4 cups of flour. I do 1 cup of white flour and then 3 cups of whole wheat flour. This makes it a little more fluffy and crispy, though you can go all 4 cups whole wheat flour if you want. The last ingredient is going to be 3 tablespoons of wheat gluten. This is going to help the bread be a little more light and crispy. You can find this in stores, supermarkets, or online. It looks like this. Now it's time to mix everything together. I start with a fork and then I use my hands to keep mixing. If you don't want your hands doughy, you can use some food grade gloves, of course. You may need to add more water or more flour depending on the consistency. You just want it to be soft and flexible after you mix it. At this point, I separate it into 3 balls of dough and freeze 2 of them. If you're going to be freezing this for a long time, then you want to pack it really airtightly, wrap it in some saran wrap, and then put it in a Ziploc bag. One of these balls of dough is the quantity to make 1 loaf of bread or to make enough pizza, samosas, or calzones in the next recipes to serve 2 people. The next step for our dough and for the dough we froze when it's time to take it out and thaw it is to knead the dough, and that involves working it around. You can do this on a flat surface with a roller and some flour. You just want to keep folding it over, keep smashing it, keep working it. That's going to get all of the gluten to work itself into longer strands and help the CO2 bubbles form and make the dough really airy and light and not dense and heavy. And you want to do this for about 10 minutes. You'll know that you're done when the dough becomes a little more smooth. The last step for your dough is to let it rise. Cover the dough in flour, put a little flour in your bowl, and then cover it. You should let it rise somewhere for about an hour in a warm place. And an optional thing to do at this point is to flip it over and let it rise for another hour. It's going to make it even more airy and light. If you'd like to make bread at this point, you just gently take the risen dough and place it into your preheated 450-degree oven without smashing it too much. Pita bread is really easy to make. Take a section of your counter, scrub it, wash it, and rinse it, and then put some flour down. Then put a little piece of dough down and roll it out as if you were rolling out the dough for a small round pizza. And you want it to be about 1/8 of an inch thick. If you go too thin, then it's not going to balloon and expand. Then you just place this into your 450-degree preheated oven. And these take about 3 or 4 minutes to cook because they're really thin and they balloon up like this. And if you let them cook too long, they'll just get really brittle and shatter like a Christmas tree ornament. So that's pita bread. If you do overcook it and it's a little too crispy, just put it in the refrigerator and it'll be soft when it comes out. The surface that I'm cooking on is a baking stone, also known as a pizza stone. By using this, you get a perfect amount of heat to your dough, and it makes the dough strong but still light and crispy. The baking stone also fixes lots of problems you might have with the dough, like if it's not kneaded enough or kneaded too much, if it's too old, if it hasn't risen long enough. The stone will usually make it turn out okay. You can buy baking stones in hardware stores and department stores, but they are very expensive. My piece of granite only cost $5, and you can get one too if you go to a countertop fabricating store like this and just ask to see their scrapyard. They'll probably just give you a piece. If they want to charge you more than $10, just go on to the next kitchen countertop store. You can also sometimes find granite tiles in tile and hardware stores. Just make sure that the tile you're buying doesn't have any treatment or anything on the bottom of it. There's a few rules that come with keeping your stone clean and keeping it from cracking. You want to clean it with a metal spatula like I'm doing here, or any kind of stainless steel straight edge. You don't want to ever put soap on it because the rock is porous and the soap flavor will get stuck inside your stone and get in your food. You want to only clean it with water, and after you clean it with water, you want to wait about 4 or 5 hours for the stone to dry, because if you heat it when it's wet, the moisture will cause it to expand and crack. And you want the stone to be in there when you preheat your oven. You don't want to add the cold stone into the hot oven because it'll crack. And the stone takes about an hour to heat up, so you have to get your oven going for an hour before you bake anything on top of the stone. This is the best tasting thing in this video. In order to make this, you'll need to make the avocado cheese from the section before last. And the amount used in that section will be the amount used in this recipe. You'll also need to make some dough from the dough and bread section. And this recipe is going to use 1/3 of the dough made in that section in order to make calzones to serve 2 people. So since we're baking these, the first step is going to be to preheat your oven to 450 degrees. If you have a baking stone, you want to let your oven preheat for about an hour to make sure the stone gets hot enough. Along with 1 part avocado cheese filling these calzones, it's going to be 2 parts of vegetable filling, about 4 to 5 cups worth. I'm using some frozen spinach here, and I'll be defrosting this and then pre-cooking it a little bit with some onions. Onions and spinach always work well with this, and then you can put another vegetable like peppers or mushrooms in rotation, and you can add dozens of other combinations and dozens of other vegetables like eggplant, olives, artichoke hearts. After you've microwaved or steamed your vegetables, to pre-cook them for about 5 minutes. They might be a little watery, especially if you're using frozen spinach, so you might want to drain that out so that your calzone doesn't get mushy or fall apart. You can save any liquid you drain off and freeze it later to use as vegetable stock to cook rice and to add to sauces. Before you assemble your calzone, you want to put some seasoning into the filling with some salt and typical pizzeria seasonings, red pepper, garlic powder, and some oregano or Italian seasoning mix of herbs. And you'll want to add 2 teaspoons of each of these. You could add more if you like, depending on your tastes. You could add lots of fresh herbs here at this point too, like some basil leaves or some parsley. Next, take a section of your counter, clean it, rinse it, and dry it, and then start rolling out your dough. You want to put flour on top of and underneath of your dough as you're rolling it out to keep it from sticking. And then you can start slicing the dough into your sections. As I said, this serves 2 people, so 2 people get 1.5 calzones. You can make 4 calzones, as many calzones as you want. I like to make them as big as can be easily handled because the bigger they are, the less bread they contain. And then I'll start with this middle part, keep putting flour on top and underneath of this piece and keep rolling it out. And you want this to be almost 1/8 of an inch thin. You want to take the edges and really smash them down and get them really thin. That way the edges of your calzones won't be too doughy. And then you want to take some flour or some nutritional yeast like I'm doing here and spread it around a little bit on half of the dough. This is going to prevent the filling from soaking through the bottom of the calzone and tearing while you're pulling it off the counter. It's not necessary, but if you're a beginner at this is going to help you. At this point, you can add your 2 cups of avocado cheese in with your 4 cups of vegetables and start spooning it onto your dough. You want to go about an inch or inch and a half high with your fillings and then leave about a half an inch around the edge to seal the thing up with. And here I'm using a dish full of water to get on my fingers and then dab around the edges to make a tighter seal when I fold this over. The technique I use here is to pull the top dough down and press it onto the bottom and then take the bottom dough and fold it onto the top, press that down. After that's been tightly sealed, you'll need to cut some holes into the top with a knife and then carefully peel your calzone off the counter without tearing it. Now we're ready for the oven. You want to cook these on a baking stone. You could use a pan, but a baking stone is going to do the best job. I cover baking stones in the dough and bread section. So you may want to pull your oven rack out just to place your calzones on there safely without burning your knuckles on the stove. And this will take about 15 to 20 minutes to cook. You'll know it's done when the edges get brown and the whole thing gets pretty stiff. You'll notice I didn't put any cornmeal or oil or anything on the baking stone. There's no chance of anything sticking to it. And then the calzones need another 15 or 20 minutes to cool. And then it's ready to eat with some tomato dipping sauce. I usually just take some ripe tomatoes and put them in a food processor blender or use some nice organic canned crushed tomatoes and just use them as sauce uncooked. You can add more of your Italian seasoning into the tomatoes if you like. But anyways, this is the best thing for people that eat lots of cheesy, greasy food and don't believe vegan food can taste good. To make this pizza, it'll be the same ingredients as the previous calzone recipe. The pizza crust will be made from the dough in the dough and bread section. 1/3 of the dough made in that recipe will make 2 of these pizzas, and then you will want to use the avocado cheese, or you could also use the garlic sauce, but you'll want to not water it down with any water or vegetable stock, and you can add a lot more garlic to it if you're using it here. So you want to wash, rinse, and dry a section of your counter and then roll out your dough. Keep putting lots of flour on top and underneath the dough. Keep flipping it over to keep it from sticking. And we're going to make this about 1/8 of an inch thick. So then we're going to take some cornmeal and set it on top of what we will use as our peel. We don't have a wooden peel here, so I'm just going to use a sheet metal pan and add a little flour and cornmeal and then place our dough on top of this. For sauce, I'm just using some crushed tomatoes right out of the can. I would also just blend some tomatoes and use those uncooked, unseasoned. And you want to dump some in the center and then spread it out around towards the edges. Then add what we're using as cheese, the avocado cheese. This stuff has the consistency of cream cheese, so you'll have to use 2 utensils and just scoop it on top of the pie. And for your toppings, you can pre-cook them. It's not really necessary. Depends how tough the vegetables you're putting on them are. And I want to season them with some typical pizzeria seasonings, garlic powder, red pepper, and some oregano. And I'm also going to sprinkle some salt over the pizza, maybe before it goes in or after. The oven is on at 450 degrees and it was turned on an hour ago so that the baking stone could heat up. And you want to pull the stone out to have some space for yourself to drop the pizza on. The pizza should slide off fairly easily with a little bit of shaking since there's flour and cornmeal underneath the pan it's on. And this will take about 12 or 15 minutes to cook. You'll know it's done when the crust is getting crispy. And here it is after it's cooled and being chopped up. It gets pretty dried out and it's not very pretty because the avocado cheese turns kind of brown. And so to counter the dryness and the drab look, I add some more tomato sauce and some more avocado cheese. And the crust will hold it because it's very thin, but since it was cooked on a baking stone, it's going to be really strong and still light and crispy. You could also add some fresh herbs on top of the pizza at this point. So this pizza is good, but for the trouble of making the dough and making the avocado cheese, you may as well just make the calzones because the calzones are great. Samosas are kind of like Indian hot pockets. They usually have a filling of potatoes, peas, onions, and cilantro, though you can add all sorts of other replacements or combinations of vegetables like sweet potatoes, carrots, cauliflower. You can also add all sorts of different herbs. You'll need dough to make this recipe, so if you haven't seen it already, go look at the table of contents in the description and jump to that section, or buy some dough, preferably whole wheat. So since we're baking these, the first step is going to be to preheat your oven to 450 degrees. If you have a baking stone, you want to let your oven preheat for about an hour to make sure the stone gets hot enough. The samosas contain lots of garlic, ginger, spices, and some sunflower seed butter and lemon juice. So we'll put this combination together next. So when you have 4 to 5 pounds of vegetable filling like we have here, your spices will be 1 teaspoon of garam masala, 1 teaspoon curry powder, and 1 teaspoon red chilies or more, depending on how spicy you'd like them to be. Garam masala is a spice mixture from India. You might already have all the spices, so if you do, you can make it yourself, and I've shown the ingredients to garam masala in the description below within the samosa recipe. And you also want to add 2 tablespoons of garlic, 2 tablespoons of ginger, about a teaspoon of black pepper, and a teaspoon or 2 of salt at this point to the food processor. And we're going to add 2 tablespoons of some raw soaked or roasted nuts or seeds or nut or seed butter at this time. So during the blending process, there'll be a lot of stopping and stirring to make sure all those chunks of sunflower seeds are getting blended into butter. And the last thing to go into this mixture will be a tablespoon of lemon juice. So when our spices, ginger, garlic, sunflower seeds, and lemon juice is all mixed up, we will separate it into 2 equal portions. The potatoes need to be cooked a little bit before they're made into the samosas, so we'll put half the spice mixture into the potatoes and things when we're pre-cooking them and then add the rest in later, just because we don't want to overcook all of the spices and have them lose their flavor. Then you want to get 1 fairly large onion and slice it up. If you have a food processor, here's where it will come in handy. And dump this into a bowl with half our spice mixture for pre-cooking. If you don't want to, you don't have to pre-cook the onions. It depends on how oniony you like your food. Then flip over your setting from slicing to shredding on your food processor, and we'll take about 5 medium-sized peeled potatoes and shred those up. If you don't have a food processor, I think it'd be best to maybe boil, microwave, or steam the potatoes into a kind of mashed potatoes. Okay, the potatoes and onions and half the garlic ginger spice mixture is all in a big bowl ready to be pre-cooked in the microwave or baked. And I'll cook this until the potatoes get soft, maybe about 10 or 12 minutes, stirring halfway in between. Okay, our filling is ready to be assembled. The potatoes are cooked. We have some rinsed chopped cilantro to go in and the rest of our spice garlic ginger mixture. And then dump a cup and a half, maybe 2 cups of frozen peas. Peas don't need to be cooked. It works well because once you dump this into the potatoes, you can handle the potatoes without waiting for them to cool down. Next, you want to thoroughly wash and rinse some section of your counter and roll out your dough. The amount of dough you'll use will be 1/3 of the batch made in our dough and bread section. So you want to roll this out to be about 1/8 of an inch thick, and you can keep putting flour on top of it and on your surface of the counter. Keep flipping it over to keep it from sticking. So this looks like a pretty good thickness, and from here we can start to slice the dough up. It's best to use a butter knife or maybe a pizza roller so that you're not carving into your counter underneath. The way these are traditionally made is to cut a piece of dough about the size of a postcard, then use a little water to wet down the edges you want to stick together and form it into a little cone. Then scoop in your filling and press it in a little bit. You just want to make enough room to make a new seam. Wet down the edges you want to stick together, and then just pinch the dough together here to seal this up. So there's no need to poke any holes in these. At this point you can put this into your oven, let it cook for about 15 or 20 minutes. So that's the traditional way these are made. If you're making these for guests, they look better this way, but I think it's a little too much bread this way, and it would be a little time consuming to make 20 of these, so I'd rather just make a few big, ugly samosas, calzone style. So anyways, getting back to our dough, when I have my piece of dough I'm ready to fold my ingredients into, I like to roll out the edges to be extremely thin, so that way when I press the seams together and cook it, I don't end up with too much bread around the edges of it. And something to be mindful of before you start spooning your filling onto this is you want to have a lot of flour underneath this dough so that your dough doesn't stick to the counter. So as you can see, I've put the samosa filling about 1 inch high onto half of the dough, and I've left a little lip that I'm putting some water on to seal up the seam. And then I do this technique here where I pull the top and press it into the bottom and then fold the bottom back up and press it into the top to create a nice tight seam. So you want to get these filled up and sealed up as quickly as possible and then get them off the counter so that they're not sitting in moisture and sticking to the counter or tearing. You want to not make them larger than what you can lift up in one hand as well, or you're going to risk tearing them when you pull them off of the counter. These don't need any air holes poked into these. Whenever you're using the majority of potatoes and sweet potatoes, you're not going to need them. If you're using another vegetable, you might want to poke some holes in it before you bake it. And these take about 15 minutes, 20 minutes to cook. You can tell they're done when the edges get brown. So here's our samosa cut in half and cool enough to eat. The crust is nice and crispy because it was cooked on a baking stone. The potatoes make these really dry, so I eat these with lots and lots of applesauce, seasoned with lots and lots of this brand of cinnamon. Another good sauce with these is some fresh or canned crushed tomatoes. These are mung bean sprouts. These were used in the previous pad thai recipe. You can also cook these with any other number of vegetables. And in this section, we are going to grow them with some store-bought mung beans, which you can find for sale everywhere. You can reuse a plastic container to grow these in. This was a container for some dates. So then you just want to punch about 10 or 20 holes in the bottom for the water to drain out, and just make sure the holes are smaller than the mung beans so they don't fall through. And then you want to use your container to measure out how much mung beans you're going to be using. You want the mung beans to cover about half the surface of the bottom of your container. The next step is the same as soaking any nuts or seeds. You want to rinse the beans, soak them for 8 hours, and then rinse when they're done soaking. At this point, you can place your beans back in your container, and a good place to set the container is on a wire rack or somewhere that air can get underneath it so that the beans aren't just sitting in a puddle and no bacteria or mold can form. And it's from here on that you want to watch out for any mold and look out for any bad smells. If you detect anything like that, you just want to throw out the batch and start over. If the temperature is above 80 degrees, that could be a problem for you. The ideal temperature to grow these in is going to be in the low 70s. You want to rinse the beans out like this every 8 to 12 hours to not only water them, but to keep them clean. Here they are a day later, and this is when you can start eating them. When you are growing a lot of different batches and rotations, you can eat them at different stages of their growth. And an important thing to note is that you never want to eat these raw. You always want to cook them above 165 degrees for a little while because they sometimes contain E. coli, salmonella, and listeria. So I know a lot of people eat them raw, and you might be okay eating them raw, but not if you are pregnant or you are a child, elderly, have immune system problems, etc. These sprouts can be eaten raw without any threat of any foodborne illness. These are the best greens you can eat. It's your best source of chlorophyll. These are super nutritious. They cost almost nothing to grow, and they're not picked from 1,000 miles away and shipped to you a week later. And this section has two different methods of growing these sunflower sprouts. First method is going to use just 2 plates, some black oil sunflower seeds, and some seed starting mix. You can get this seed starting mix at department stores and hardware stores. We're going to have a cheaper alternative to it later. You can buy black oil sunflower seeds for sprouting from health food stores, but they are 20 times cheaper if you buy them as bird feed from pet food stores, hardware stores, department stores, supermarkets. The quality is usually the same. The bird feed will have some twigs in it, and sometimes when you buy it as bird feed, the seeds will be smashed and discolored, and that's when you can tell that they are not going to sprout at a good rate. But if they don't sprout or there's anything wrong with them, you can just take them back because chain stores will give you a refund, no questions asked, and then you can just buy another brand. The bird feed should show the ingredients on the back. It should say just sunflower seed. Every once in a while, you'll see a brand that contains some vitamins and chemicals and oils. Anyways, you want to use your plate to measure out how much seed you're going to use. You want enough seed to just cover the surface. It's okay if they're overlapping in spots. Next step is the same as the mung beans and any nut and seed soaking. You want to rinse the seeds, soak the seeds for at least 8 hours, and then rinse them off again. The difference with these is they're going to soak in a container that's completely filled with water so that they're not floating on top of each other and some are getting wet and some are staying dry. Next, you want to take some of your seed starting mix and dump it onto a plate and then dump some water on it and stir it up. You'll notice that the seed starting mix tends to float on top of the water, so you just have to work it around and get it a little bit muddy to make sure all the water is being evenly distributed. When it's wetted nicely, you'll know you'll have enough when it's somewhere between a quarter inch and a half an inch thick. At this point, it's ready for your seeds. You just want to kind of even it out a little bit. Doesn't matter if one's on top of another, they'll find a way. Then you want to take your second plate and press down a little bit and then tilt it and just get some of the excess water out. Now you can put it in a closet and just forget about it for 3 days. You don't need to water it or do anything to it. 3 days later, take it out, give it a little water around the edges, but be careful not to overwater it since there's no drainage. At this point, if you have any weird smells, you probably want to throw it out and take your seeds back and get a different brand. You might notice mold in some spots, but that's perfectly normal. Eventually, the sunflowers will kill all the mold. Then you just want to put the plate back on top of it and put it back in the closet for another day. Here they are on day 4. You might want to give it a little more water if it needs it. And you want to take the plate and flip it over. Leave it like this for another day. Around day 5, you'll take the plate off and they'll turn green very quickly and start to grow. They'll grow at this rate if your temperature is somewhere in the low 70s. If it's colder, they won't grow as quickly. If it's warmer, they might grow faster. If it's above 80 degrees, you want to keep a fan nearby to keep any mold and fungus from forming. Half of them are going to have little sunflower shells stuck to their leaves, so you can peel these off. And these are ready to eat once they turn green. If you're growing these in succession, starting a new plate every few days, you want to be eating them at different stages of their growth. So you just chop them right there and then give them a rinse in a strainer, and they're good to eat raw. Here they are on day 6. Here they are on day 7, and this is the time you want to harvest, especially harvest the tall ones. You'll notice that they're ready right when these little leaves inside start to form. After that, the new leaves are sprouted and they start to get really stringy and they don't have the same pleasant taste anymore. To do this next method, you need to do a little hunting and working on some special hardware, but Once you have it, it's a lot easier to grow a lot more sprouts. I got all of this metal stuff for $5. I got this bottom part at a thrift store for $2, and I bought the other trays from a dollar store. You might be able to find the same type of setup with trays made out of plastic at nurseries, but it'll probably cost you the same. If you go the route I went and you get some pans from the dollar store, you're going to want to drill some holes through them. That's going to keep the water from overflowing and let it drain and let some air in underneath. And this is going to be important when the temperature might get above 80. So you want to get a drill. You could also use a hammer and a nail and just hammer through these into a piece of wood. After you make the holes, they're going to be really jagged and just waiting to cause tetanus. So you want to put them against something hard and hit them with a hammer. So now your trays have lots of nice holes. Every inch or two, it's ready to measure out your sunflower seeds, just enough to cover the bottom surface. Doesn't matter if they overlap. And the following steps should be familiar. Rinse, soak for 8 hours, and then rinse again. We're going to make our own seed starting mix. It's going to be 5 parts peat moss and 1 part perlite or vermiculite. Peat moss is just moss, and perlite and vermiculite are minerals, so there's no dirt or soil involved. It's much cheaper to make your own seed starting mix this way. With your peat moss, you're probably going to want to keep it in a separate container because it comes in these giant blocks that you'll probably want to keep in your garage. So 5 parts peat moss, 1 part vermiculite, and then add some water and work the water in. Whatever seed starting medium you're using, it has to be sterile, so that means you can't use manure, garden soil, or dig up some dirt from your backyard, or else you'll be growing fungus and microorganisms you don't want. So dump your seeds on the mix, spread them out, and then put your tray on top. What you can do here is just put some weights on it, or you can put another tray of more far ahead sprouts and just keep 4 trays going at all times. Start a new tray every 2 or 3 days. You want to get yourself a raindrop watering can or poke some holes in some container and get something that drops water. You want to water these after day 2 or 3 every day, and just keep an eye on the soil and make sure that the sunflower sprouts aren't falling over. Just like with the plate method, once you take the weight off around day 3 or 4, you're going to want to flip it over and still keep them in the dark for a day or two. If you don't have an extra tray, you can do this with some aluminum foil. Fruit is for breakfast 1.5 to 2 pounds or 700 to 900 grams. You should also eat as much fruit as you care to throughout the day. With fruit, you want to eat as many different kinds as you can get your hands on. You don't want your taste buds getting dull from eating the same thing over and over again, and you want to take advantage of all the different nutrients in the plant kingdom. You might want to use a peeler and take the skin off of every piece of produce that's not organic because it's probably covered in pesticides. I'll have this with fruit a lot for breakfast. It's some oats and raisins I cook, and then I'll add a little walnuts that have been food processed into a fine powder, or some kind of nuts or seed butter. I always prefer any nuts or seeds I eat be pulverized into a powder or a butter, just because it's so much easier on the digestive system to eat foods that are soft and high in water. If you don't know, you'll need to learn what produce is in season at what time of the year. Some things go out of season for 6 months, even though they're still in the stores. You don't want to buy them. Watermelon is pretty much only good from May until October in North America. In my experience, the inverse of those months, from October to May, navel oranges tend to be really good. And a rule about buying oranges and most fruit in general is you don't want it to look faded and have green shades on it. You want it to be deep, rich, and vibrant looking, like this orange. And it's the same basic concept with apples, whatever color the apple variety is supposed to be, like red in this case. The redder it is, generally the better it's going to be. If it's greenish or yellowish or half yellow, it's not going to be as good as the reddest. Sometimes the local supermarket will have things on sale for near a wholesale price. If it's on sale, it's probably in season. These grapes are probably sweet and in season since they're so cheap and they have so many of them. Here's some blueberries. I always keep some berries in my freezer, and they usually taste better and are more ripe when you get them frozen, in my experience. When you buy them fresh, they're usually twice as expensive. And they're usually so underripe, they're really sour, or they're overripe and turn to mush when they're fresh. It's nice to have a big stockpile of berries in your freezer in case you wake up someday without any fresh produce and you don't have any other options for breakfast. I microwave the berries on defrost or half power for about 5 minutes so that my teeth don't get frostbite. So this is a good combination. Any frozen berries, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, with a few tablespoons of some quick oats. Quick oats are the oats that are already cooked that you just need to add water to. And you can also have this with 3 or 4 bananas and some nuts or seeds in a powder or butter. Here's some plantains and some oats. And if you're not familiar with plantains, they are green when you buy them. They are yellow when they are ready to cook, and they turn almost black like this when they're ready to be eaten like a banana. And with these, I just poked some holes in them and put them in the microwave till they got a little soft. Sugar-free applesauce is something else really good to always keep on standby, like frozen berries, in case you ever run out of any other options. And this cinnamon is the only thing you should go to Whole Foods for, however that's pronounced. You can eat it by the tablespoon, and it's a pretty good price for how much they give you. But anyway, that's how I eat a 32-ounce jar of applesauce in the morning. So with fruit, just the same as vegetables, keep eating new families of fruit, eat entire family trees, eat every member of the banana family, eat every member of the melon family. Continue to expand your rotation, eat things you haven't eaten in a long time, eat new things you've never eaten before. Jicama, in case you're not aware of it, is something that tastes kind of like an apple. It's a root, and you peel it like you would peel a potato, and then just eat it like an apple. Most supermarkets sell jicama. I always see them at Walmart. If you drink coffee and you drink it with a lot of milk and sugar, or you drink Starbucks, which is basically chocolate milk and coffee, you should be aware of carob powder. Its flavor is very close to coffee and cocoa, but unlike coffee and cocoa, it doesn't contain caffeine, and you don't need to add any kind of sweeteners because it's naturally sweet. What I'm doing here is using an old jar and adding 4 or 5 tablespoons to a cup of water, and then I'm just going to put the lid on this and shake it because stirring it with a fork or spoon tends to make it really lumpy. So the easiest way to mix them together is just to put a lid on it and shake it. You can use cold water or hot water. If you want to use boiling hot water, you can buy certain jars for pickling, like mason jars that can withstand boiling water and being microwaved. And having your beverage in a jar works well as a travel mug to take with you in your car or school or work in the morning. When you stop eating meat, you have to start taking the vitamin B12. They come in pills that dissolve underneath your tongue. You take one pill each week, and this store here is selling 2 years worth of B12 for $9.99. B12 is not available in any plant foods, so you have to take this supplement or you can get serious health problems or die. Just because B12 is available in meats doesn't mean you're meant to eat meat. It's not the only natural source. B12 is also in rivers and lakes, but you probably don't drink from rivers and lakes, so this should be your source. If you don't spend very much time in the sun, you need to take a D3 supplement. If you live north or south of the red lines, then you need to take the D3 supplement during the wintertime. D3 supplements in most stores contain bovine collagen. You can order vegan D3 from Amazon. When you stop eating a diet high in animal products, shown on the left, you'll have to eat a diet high in fruits and vegetables, shown on the right. The food on the right weighs more because produce is 80 to 90% water. It's important to make fruits and vegetables your primary source of calories, and it's important to eat as many different fruits and vegetables as you can get your hands on. You should gradually shift your diet to something twice its weight in produce. So, as long as you're getting enough calories and you're eating a wide array of produce and taking your B12, there is zero chance that this diet will give you any kind of nutritional deficiency or make you sick, no matter if you're young, old, male, female, sick, healthy, athlete, or couch potato. So you can have a huge amount and huge variability of what you like for your pantry, but you should have the major groups of canned goods, dried fruit, spices and seasonings, grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes. You should also have seaweed or some dried sea vegetables. Nori works well with a lot of things. The yellowish stuff in the plastic bag is nutritional yeast, which is a really good seasoning. It kind of tastes like gravy. Since it's so important on this diet to get your calories from produce, that means you'll have to limit the amount of grains, nuts, seeds, and beans to about 30% of your calories. That means no more than a cup of grains and beans cooked per day, and no more than 3 or 4 handfuls of nuts, seeds, and dried fruit per day. Here's some foods you should never eat. The animal products and sugar are the worst. I'm not going to get into why we are so ill-suited to consume animal products, but if you'd like to read further about it, you can look at the work of Dr. Dean Ornish and the work of Dr. Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org, where he covers mountains of peer-reviewed, irrefutable evidence on the topic. You can find links to their work in the description below if you're interested. Anyways, getting back to the list, what everything on this list has in common is that all of it is a high concentration of empty calories. These are all low in nutrients, and most of these are low in water. They're also overpriced wastes of money. Even though the bottom 3/4 of this list is popular among vegans, and these things are actually vegan foods, they're really bad for you, and if you eat them often, you will burn out your taste buds and your palate will become skewed towards eating this concentrated calorie junk food, and you won't be able to taste real food, which is fruits and vegetables. Your food costs on this diet are going to be a fraction of what they are on any other diet. You'll be eating about 40 to 60 pounds of produce per week, so you should be buying all of your produce wholesale. You can go on Google Maps wherever you are and just type in wholesale produce. You can also look on Facebook. Some produce wholesalers have specials every week where you can buy a 50-pound box of a lot of different items. You can also go on Facebook for a produce co-op in case your wholesaler doesn't sell low enough quantities of food. A produce co-op is just a group of consumers just like you that use their strength in numbers and buying power to get huge quantities of produce from the distributor and then divvy up a large variety of different types of produce into smaller quantities for everybody. The cheapest and highest quality source of produce would be from growing it yourself if you have the time and space. That way, you wouldn't be paying for oil to ship your food from all corners of the world. You would pollute less and you would create less oil based plastic garbage containers and other waste. You can lobby your local government, like your county commission or city council, and tell them you'd like them to build public greenhouses. And whether you're growing or buying your food, you should lobby your federal government and tell them to stop all subsidies to the bankrupt animal agriculture industry and to start subsidies to the fruit and vegetable farmers. As far as your dry goods, for getting them at wholesale prices, you can buy a wholesale quantity of like a 25-pound bag of rice here from Amazon, and a lot of items for sale on Amazon will be free shipping if they're over $35, so you can stock up on a lot of pantry items in bulk quantities. Sam's Club and Costco sell produce, but it's not much better than supermarket prices. The best thing to get at Costco is frozen berries, but you can also get those at Walmart. Kirkland brand is Costco's brand of nuts and seeds, which is actually pretty cheap and really good quality. But you can order those on Amazon and get them with free shipping for about the price they cost at Costco with a membership. So you can order those along with your D3 and other pantry items. If you live in a big enough city, there's going to be a foreign population and they're going to have their own supermarkets or markets. So you should be sure to go check those out. And you can always find a deal on something much cheaper than you'd find it anywhere else. Like this Vietnamese supermarket is selling brown rice in 50-pound bags for a really good price. And they're selling these huge jars of turmeric for $7 and these other jars of curry powder for $6. You can always find some nice dried chilies for cheap at the Latin American or Asian supermarkets. Another great thing about foreign markets is that they sell foreign produce. And as I've said before, it's really important for your taste buds and for your health that you eat a lot of genetic variation and always seek to eat every plant's relatives, eat every plant's family tree, and seek out new vegetables you haven't ever seen before and figure out how to eat those. So I always have an avocado with a Subway sub. I always ask them to take the bread out, and that means they scrape the bread out and put more vegetables in. I don't get any oil or any crap. I just get some mustard and as many vegetables as can fit. Chipotles are everywhere too. You can get a burrito bowl with all vegan ingredients for about $7. Weighs about 2 pounds. There are Chinese restaurants everywhere. They all sell steamed mixed vegetables. Just make sure to ask for no sauce or sauce on the side and then throw it away and just eat it with soy sauce because their sauce is garbage. Gas stations and supermarkets always have microwaves. None of the employees at these places will care if you want to microwave some cabbage. They won't even notice what you're doing. So you can microwave some cabbage or whatever and just eat it with a piece of whole wheat bread or something if you're traveling or if you don't have any other plans for lunch and you don't want to spend more than $2. Best way to rid yourself and be free of toxins is to eat the food in this video and not eat anything with toxins in it. like junk food or animal products. People absorb a lot of hazardous compounds from their deodorant and toothpaste, so you can use baking soda as both. You just put some baking soda in your palm, wet your brush, and voila, toothpaste. And it's just as easy to use it as deodorant, cleaner than bottled water because it is held to higher regulation standards by the government. So just get a porcelain glass or stainless steel container and fill it up at drinking fountains and faucets. And on the topic of water, drinking water is very detoxifying. Dilution is the solution to pollution. So always have your container of water within reach. Sweating is detoxifying, and fasting is detoxifying and very healthy, though it's not fun or easy. To fast, you just want to lay still and drink some water. If you've never fasted, you just want to fast for a day or two. Once you get used to that, you can fast for a week or two or go as long as you feel like without food, which will probably be about 3 weeks at the most.